I'm Garrick Francis. This is the Inheritance to Income podcast, where we help families, founders, and leaders move from legacy by default to legacy by design. If you're building something for the next generation, but not quite sure what comes next, you're in the right place. I'm your legacy advocate. Let's talk about it. June 1st marks 35 years of marriage to Sheila Monique Whitaker Francis. So today, I want to talk about marriage not as a sentiment, not just as a covenant, but as legacy design. Not because we did everything perfectly. We haven't. Not because we didn't have challenges, but because we were resilient. Because 35 years teaches you some things about love and repair and faith, decisions, family, stewardship, and building something that can carry the weight forward into the future. And today's format is also a little different. The questions are coming from the man behind the camera for Inheritance to Income, my son, Ries Francis. Ries helped shape and edit this show. He helps the substance. He also is building Ries Francis Studios, where he helps families, founders, and leaders preserve and create stories through photography, videography, and editing. So this episode is sponsored by Ries Francis Studios. And that feels fitting because today we're talking about marriage, memory, faith, family, and what gets carried forward into the next generation. Yeah, go ahead, Reese.
Okay, cool. Hey, Dad.
Hey, son.
My first question is, when you look back over 35 years with Mom, what do you think that you two, were really building even before you had the language of legacy?
Yeah, legacy has always been important to my family, but I don't think that I named it until more recently. I think when you ask what we were building, we were a covenant, right? We were under God's direction, and so we wanted to build a family foundation that was really strong. First, it was just the two of us before you and your baby sister came along, and we were determined not just to build a life. We were entrusted with each other. And so to us, marriage is two becoming one. And so that's what we were set out to build, right? We set out to get to know each other, to love each other, to support each other's dreams and hopes and ambitions. But what developed beyond the love was structure that supports a family and a future and looks towards what can be, not just what is in that day. And so with God's blessing, legacy was being created even though we didn't recognize it, I think, in the earliest days.
Okay. Well, to piggyback off of that, after, you were married, what did marriage teach you about legacy, that career success, money, achievement couldn't have taught you?
I think marriage teaches you that while your career success can be mainly individual, marriage is about relationship. And it's really about the coming together of dreams and ambitions and of hopes. And so, again, while success can be individual, marriage and legacy is relational. And marriage, we look now, I think, marriage is stewardship, right? So your career, you're looking at how can I climb the career ladder? What milestones can I achieve? I need to make money to take care of my family. But at the end of the day, when you come home and you're sitting together, you're really thinking about what is the purpose of what we're doing? What is the purpose of what we're building? And who are we building it for, right? What comes next? Mom and I, we didn't have you until we were 10 years into our marriage, right? And a lot of people go through that. Some people because of choice, some people because having children is more challenging, which was our case. But we really always still focused on who are we building this for. And I think one of the other things that we learned that the career success can't really teach you is how to give, live, and steward. Career teaches you how to live first and then give second and steward later. And I think marriage, if you really look at the foundation of it, it's about giving. It's about giving to one another. It's about giving to your families. Then it becomes about giving to your community. And then it's about living together and experiencing things together and going on the journey together. And then it's about stewarding. How do you take care of that for your children and your children's children and the next generation? So I think those are some of the differences between what you see in the career and really kind of what you see in marriage.
Okay, yeah, no, that's it's good to know for the future. um, Another question I had was, when you and mom were building a life together, what were some of the seasons or phases that you say were much harder or a lot more to deal with than people might assume?
Wow, yeah. I think I mentioned before, marriage is a covenant, not a contract.
Mm.
And so when you come to those challenges in your life, you fall back on the covenant. You fall back on, we weren't in this alone, right? We were God's not a silent partner in our marriage. I mean, there are faith-based things where we had to rely on God and each other during those trying times.
Yeah.
Those are financial. Those are physical. Mom and I have both had, physical challenges during our marriage that required the other to take up the load and carry more at one time or another. And we've always had a plan and an ability to look beyond what was happening in the current moment. And I think that's one of the things when things get tough, when you're facing those types of hard seasons, that's when doubt and fear and worry tend to creep in. I kind of say DFW, but you need to learn to go to DCA, which is direction, clarity, and alignment.
Okay.
And so you think about your commitment to one another, and you think about the longevity and what you hope to see in that, and then you plan for it.
Right.
It's not something you just walk into unintentionally. Marriage is, I think I've learned over the years that we are most successful together in tough seasons when we're intentional, when we are planning and when we are talking and we are working together, rowing in the same direction, if you will, towards a shared goal. So we had to establish those goals together and to make sure we were going in that right direction. I think that's how we face some of those more challenging seasons that we've come into.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. But speaking of, like you said, facing and learning, what was the process like if you had to face something like, money problems, parenting issues? Not that you've had any, of course, but parenting issues, work, faith, family pressure, other risk. Like you talk a lot about, having to face that with mom. But what was that like? Like, was there a lot of trial and error? What was going on?
Yeah, I think, marriage is a strong marriage. When your family starts to grow, a strong marriage doesn't just bless a couple. It becomes a place for the family to be safe,
Right.
and to be secure, and for them to create a foundation. And so I think, when mom and I may have been making a lot of those decisions, you have to come up with some kind of decision making system almost.
Mm-hmm.
One of the interesting things I think is that I've often heard a statement that said, people have said marriage is 50-50, and I disagree with that, because 50-50 is a tie, and 50-50 means you don't make a decision, right? In a marriage, you have times in your system when one person has to ultimately be the decider, and one person has to be the advisor and the recommender, and then you're both the executor. So there's a decision method that's called DARE. Right? Decide. You have a decider, you have advisors, you have recommenders, and you have executors, people who implement. And in marriage, it's a little bit different, but you have to have someone who's going to ultimately make a decision. And you go back and forth. You have these unaccustomed conversations, and you're talking with one another, and you're looking back towards the plan that you created, whether that's your family plan or your financial plan. All in our case, all faith based. Following what God has hopefully wanted us to do, and you put structure to it. And when you have structure to it, then you have an ability when times get tough and things get emotional and you get worried to go back to. Like what's our structure? What's in our plan? What are we hoping to do? And you always have to be resilient. You always have to shuffle and make changes to those plans together. But that's the way I think Mom and I, through prayer and conversation and alignment, and as I mentioned, from moving from doubt, fear, and worry to direction, clarity, and alignment. It's not easy, but that is, I think, for us has been kind of a roadmap as I look back on it. Not that it was necessarily named that while we were doing it. Sometimes maybe I wish it would have been, but now I think that's kind of how I've named it today.
Yeah, no, for sure. Going back to what you said about one person being the kind of decider and then the advisor. You and Mom always move as a unit, right? That's something everybody who knows you knows. You're really one person, the same brain. It's kind of scary sometimes. But given that, obviously, there's a lot that goes on. What does it mean to protect that unit, that we, when life might pull you in different directions, or might force it. It's a little harder for it to be one person does this, one person does that, but you operate as a unit. How do you protect that feeling and that notion that you have?
Yeah, I think marriage is the ultimate merger in a way, because what happens is in a marriage you come into it and you're two individuals, and the covenant says you're becoming one flesh, you're becoming one, which you point out, Mom and I are one when it comes to making a lot of those choices, working through the decisions we have to make, getting clarity, getting alignment. We're certainly one when it comes to you and Karis. And you go to her, you go to me, you're going to get the same answer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I think we found at the same time is you come into it from two different families, and so you're merging your families, and you're creating a new family unit on your own.
Right.
And so that takes time, and it takes structure, and it takes a system to protect the marriage against drift or the pulls and pressures to go one way or the other. You focus on your own family and what you have to do and the plan you have for your family to grow and ultimately to leave a legacy and steward for your children's children, as it says in the Bible. And I think that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to make sure that we created a home where you know where you come from.
Yeah.
You know about your great-grandparents and your grandparents, and you know about what they went through. You've seen what we go through, so you can now plan for the future, knowing from where you come, knowing the values that your family has, and to carry those forward. And hopefully we've done this where there's not an unwieldy amount of pressure on the two of you to move it forward, but there's a handoff, that there's a plan like Grandma had for us, right? There's a plan in place, and you've been at the table during kind of the family boardroom conversations. You've heard us talk about our money story and where things come from. You've heard us talk about the real estate that Granddad had, or you've heard us talk about Mom's family and the love that such a large family shares with each other. I came from a smaller family on one side. Mom came from a larger family. And we brought all those things into the relationship. And then you catalog them, right? That's part of the system. You catalog who you are and where you come from and what your values are and what your shared values are. And then that becomes the system for how you choose which path to go down. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I understand that. No, definitely That provides a lot of insight, actually.
Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say, obviously, your marriage is a really big part of who you are. Obviously, it's why our family's here, that type of thing. But like you said you come from a smaller family. Mom comes from a bigger family. You know, and now we have our family. So I think I want to ask, how did you marrying mom, how did the marriage kind of shape the way you think about, children, us, inheritance going forward, or inheritance, from behind, or, things like family responsibility and like what you carried in the future? Like how is marriage really, like, I guess I'd say, honed your thoughts, or, molded your perspective on that?
I think that marriage, when you grow your family, when you add children to the mix, um, you realize that children inherit what they watch, and children inherit what they see as much as what they hear, and as what they read. And so, as parents, you what mom and I think have tried to do is that we have tried to be of one accord, to be like-minded, to work together to make sure that we were instilling in our children, you and Karis, the values that are important to us, knowing that, when you grow up, you're going to do what you need to do. To paraphrase, the Bible says, train up a child in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it.
Right.
It doesn't say when they're young they won't depart from it. It says when they're old they won't depart from it. So what we want to instill and pass on to you, those values. We want to make sure that we've created a family culture that gives you what we believe is important: a faith-based, resilient, where conflicts are managed in love, right? Love. I've said before, love is a motivation and an inspiration. Love is not a plan.
Right.
Love over time needs structure so that it can build, and it can build something for the future. And so when you do that, you create the emotional infrastructure, you create the physical infrastructure for your family's security. You create the model of family responsibility that you hope your children and your children's children follow. And you create the systems in the home so that the home runs well. In our case, mom was a stay-at-home mom. So the system we built was one that was, how do we take care of the children and the house and our family? But that was after much discussion to figure out which way we wanted to go, and to sit down and to build that into our family design, which now I see is becoming part of our family legacy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, that's, you're good at this whole talking thing, because I don't know how you keep predicting my questions, but I was going to ask next, when it comes to legacy, a lot of couples probably don't necessarily think about that, when they're getting into being a couple. So what would you say, couples that you've seen often underestimate about building legacy together? What are they, like, forgetting, or stuff like that?
I think marriage is one of the first legacy design systems that you build. You don't know it when you start that that's what you're doing, but again, you're bringing together two people and two families and two histories, two different family DNAs, and you're combining those together. And so I think when couples come into it, it depends on what you've seen and what you've inherited. That's sometimes how you go into it. If you've grown up in a family where what you and Karis have seen with us, you're going to take that with you when you move on to finding that special someone and getting married. Karis is going to take it with her. You may not do everything the same, but it's ingrained, right? So you know that. You know it. Even though mom and I, both lost our fathers when we were relatively young, there are things that we brought to our relationship that came directly from our watching our parents.
Right.
And so I think couples underestimate, the power of what their children see. And I think parents, I think in a marriage, you also sometimes can underestimate the challenges of building and merging together.
Okay.
Right? Depending on when Mom and I got married when we were 24 years old. So we came out of school and we got married a couple years later, and we often joke that, we chose to have one bank account because we couldn't afford two bank fees. But we wanted to merge everything together early on. Some people are getting married later in life. They've had careers and they've had time of their own, and so they're coming together and blending their history and their DNA and their families can be a little more challenging, right? But it still just takes a system of understanding, again, replacing doubt, fear, and worry with direction, clarity, and alignment. What direction do we want to go in? How do we get that clarity? And then what is our alignment that we're going to follow? That can be in financial planning. That can be in estate planning. That's in family planning. That's in elder care planning. How are you going to take care of your parents on both sides as they get older, as people live longer? So these are all things that, as a family, you have to have these unaccustomed conversations. You have to start having them early because they're going to affect your legacy and your marriage as you move forward. There's a need in a marriage for roles and for rhythm and for prayer and stewardship, and you have to kind of define those things. And I think it helps if you are able to talk about them in a fun way.
I would agree. That's great advice. So, my last question for the day. What would you tell a younger couple, that wants to build not just a marriage but a legacy? Like, what would you tell maybe yourselves if you were younger? What would you say to your younger self about, building a legacy?
Enjoy the journey.
Right.
I think I would say start with intention, right? Intentionality and honesty in all things. Put God at the center of it. But have those early unaccustomed conversations. Create that family boardroom where you're sitting around talking about your family history and your values. The amazing thing today that you have and that Karis has and that everybody has, that we were just starting to get when Mom and I got married, is this thing called cell phone. So Mom and I had cell phones, believe it or not, son, that didn't have cameras. They couldn't record. I don't,
What's that like?
Yeah, what's that like? But we have these devices now where we can literally record periods of our life. It's not a VCR camera on the shoulder anymore. Have to carry it around. You literally can sit there and leave a message for future generations on your phone about something you're doing in real time, about something that's happening in your marriage or in society, or a message. So you have that ability to plan forward visually. And you're a creative, you're a filmmaker, you're a photographer and a videographer. You understand how important and strong that can be, allowing someone in their own word to deliver a message to someone they've never met.
Yeah.
And so, and we're talking now all this social media, and I think what I would tell a younger couple is to use family media. Let your family in the future know what you were like when you were younger, right? Let them know what it was like and what the things you were going through. Chronicle and record your life. Document your life so that future generations will really know and understand. I think the other thing is, don't wait for crisis to occur before you plan, before you find that direction and clarity. You develop resilience through preparation. Right? People don't just bounce back because something happens. They bounce back because they were prepared for something to happen. Right? We talk a lot in Faith and Finance about building an emergency fund. $1,000, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months worth. You should have an emergency fund for your family. You should have an emergency fund of values that you can rely on when crisis hits. You should have an emergency fund of strength and love that is part of the structure you can rely on when crisis hits, because crisis will hit no matter where you are and who you are. And that's what allows you to really give, live, and steward throughout your life, throughout your marriage. Those are the types of things I think that I really think I've learned in 35 years of marriage, that I often tell Mom, and you have to have, I think, little value sayings for each other. I've often said to Mom, before we got married, and I thought about it, I said, once I get married, there are 10 things I probably won't be able to do with her by my side, but there's nothing I can't do with her by my side. Now, she wouldn't give me permission to skydive. That was off the checklist. But there were very few things that I could envision that we couldn't do together.
Right.
And so those are the types of things you have to really focus on when you're coming together, when you're building a marriage, when you're trying to really move forward. I think that's a lot of what I've learned.
Thank you for imparting your knowledge on me.
And I do think I want to make sure and stop and say, if you've heard something in this episode that you like, we'd obviously love for you to like and subscribe and to share it with someone who might find it helpful or interesting. But also, if this episode makes you think about the conversations your own family still needs to have, those unaccustomed conversations, that's why we've created a 12 conversations every family should have. Those unaccustomed conversations that help you build legacy. It's a simple guide that helps families begin those conversations around values and responsibility and roles and stories to help you go from doubt, fear, and worry to direction, clarity, and alignment. And you can request it through the information in the show notes below. If your family needs help moving from conversation to clarity, please reach out. We can begin a conversation. It's something that we've learned to do, and we're still learning to do. But that, if it's helpful, it's part of the show notes.
Cool.
What else, son? Is there anything else that I can that comes to mind?
I think that's all on my end. I've heard a lot of great information today. And I hope people take from what you say as much as I do. So, thank you for telling me.
You're welcome. I think family legacy is not really only transferred in documents; it's really in daily patterns.
Yeah.
And everything can be a slight, course correction. You can turn left, you can turn right, but then you evaluate it. You kind of think about where you've been and where you want to go intentionally. And one thing that I think was really important that several episodes ago, in talking with Shakisha Morgan, the legacy counselor, she said you have to build and bridge.
Right.
And so I think a marriage falls into that. Our marriage has allowed us to build, but when you're young in a marriage, you focus on building.
Mm-hmm.
But as your marriage matures, you focus on bridging.
Right.
You start to develop those bridges that will help prepare your next generation in your family, your children, your nieces, your nephews, to carry forward and to move forward into the next generation. As they become adults, they then start to look at how do they do it for generations yet to come. And I think that's what we hope to continue to do in everything that we're building.
Yeah. Sure.
So, again, if this episode has blessed you, we hope that you'll hit the like and subscribe button and share it with others. I want to really thank you for the time that you've granted me and my son, Ries Francis. We don't take it for granted. God bless.